In the previous video, we talked about the tremendous importance of covenant and how we can't understand who God is and our relationship to God and what the nature of what God is offering to us apart from covenant. And I also talked about how covenant leads to a new kind of relationship where two parties now they do binding oaths and curse under God, under a transcendent authority, so that they'll now have a special relationship. Okay. Now, what is the purpose? What's the goal of covenant? Now, from the previous video, maybe it already makes sense to you, but I want to make it very, very explicit. The purpose of covenant is to take two parties, including, and it's especially important that the one that is more powerful is obligated to this, is that two, especially if one is more powerful than the other, will now come together and have what is more of a face-to-face, deep relationship of love, trust, and mutual blessing. Let me say that. A binding promise that leads to a new kind of relationship where no longer one holds all the cards and has all the power, and the other side just has to, simply because they're under power, under the threat of power and out of fear, but out of their own willingness to, from the heart, say, I will trust you, I will bless you, now I will love you, not primarily out of feelings, but because now we are more like not one higher than the other who can come down and make one side behave the way they want or get the quote unquote blessings that they want. Instead, the one that is higher will now come face to face, and both will say, I now trust you, I now will bless you, we now will love you, and together we'll have a new deep relationship of oneness. Two will now become of oneness and of great mutual blessing and of love. That's the goal. So let's just use some historical first. Just talk about nations. Why would nations want to do this? So if one was more powerful and one, you went up against, so maybe the weaker nation would just know that if we go to war, the powerful nation would just kill us. But the powerful nation would just say, well, we don't want just you to simply be our subjects. And then in the future, you might war against us. You may not trade with us. You may not want to bless us. You may not want to intermarry with us because, since you're always afraid of us, or you're always resentful of us, or you're always racist against us, what will always happen is then you will try to stab us in the back. You'll always find ways to try to passive aggressively not be one with us, not be at peace with us, so that we can't trust each other. We can't mutually bless each other. We certainly won't love each other. In fact, we could say we love each other, but it'll mostly be a phony kind of way where we're always just looking out, like, how is he going to stab me in the back? This is how two nations would think. Now, whether they went to war, this is the real issue. Now, what if they wanted a deeper peace, a true peace? And two nations would come together, and they wouldn't just say, we're now just going to be we're more powerful, so now you're just our subjects. No, we'll say, no, we were two, but now let us truly have a new kind of oneness. They would seek covenant. And so they would make these binding oaths, maybe the two representatives of both nations, maybe, probably the king and the king or something like this, or the prince and the prince, and they would come together, and then they would have some kind of covenantal ceremony, and it's often worshipful, and then they would have something like, if this doesn't happen, may God incur curse upon us and our people. And then they would often offer something to bind them together into this deeper new union. And classic, just very classic in history would be, this king, maybe the king of the suzerain nation, and would offer his daughter or his son in marriage to the king of the vassal nation. And so now the king of the more powerful nation would literally have grandchildren that he'd have to love. He can't just say, well, they're that people, we don't care about. No. So no, we want to unite ourselves to you. So there's actually a beautiful sequence. There's a movie called Henry V. It was based on the Shakespeare play Henry V. And what happens in that movie is the English and the French go to war. and normally they hate each other. It's like, you French dogs, we hate you. You English dogs, we hate you. And they go to war. And then what happens is the English win. But they don't want to have this continual war and hatred and racism toward each other. So Henry V, whose nickname is Hal goes to the French king, whom now he's the suzerain, right? And the French is the vassal. Goes to the French king, and he offers himself in marriage to the daughter of the French king, to the French princess. And there's this beautiful scene at the end of the movie where, like, he doesn't even speak French very well. She doesn't really speak English. And they meet, and Hal really begins to try to woo this French princess and to say, I will love you. I will love you. And thus our two nations will become one. And, our children will literally be the embodied one flesh union of our two nations, and we'll now have peace, and we'll now, instead of being at war and hatred and racism with each other, we'll now be united literally by our blood. We'll become one. That's a classic picture of how covenant was fulfilled in history, right? And then, of course, human beings are sinners, so then they fail it, and so to this day, the French and the English still probably, look down upon each other, etc. Okay, but that's a class example. Now, the quintessential vision of covenant, I've already kind of point to this in the Bible, is marriage. So let me take you to classic text, tremendously important text. This is Genesis chapter 2, and God institutes marriage in Genesis chapter 2. He creates Adam and Eve, etc. But here he institutes marriage, and God oversees. It's like, it is not good for Adam to be alone, and then he makes one that is fit for him, that corresponds to him, a woman. He's allotted. God institutes, ordains the first marriage, and then there's this really tremendously important verse at the end of chapter 2. It's right here. So chapter 2:24. So Adam is excited. At last, bone of my phone. He's really excited, and he finally, he has his wife. It says, verse 24, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife. He will literally be glued to his wife. They'll hold fast. They'll become tied together, and you can't pull them apart. And they shall become one flesh. See, one. It's not two. One flesh over here, but not two, but one. There were two. The union is so important that now this marriage is like in a really deep way. Of course, the man is still the man, and the woman is still the woman, and they're still individual persons and they don't lose that individual personhood. But now their union is so deep, it's described in the Bible as one flesh. And then verse 25, and the man and the woman, and the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. A short and seemingly very simple verse, but here's what it's saying. They could see each other all the way through. There is no agenda. There's no passive aggressive, I'm going to get something out of you. They could see each other all the way through. Thus, they could utterly trust each other. And then when they give themselves to each other, and then that's actually literally what the picture of sex is. When they have sex, their bodies are now united into one flesh. And it's actually, a body and soul donation. I give my body and soul to you. You give your body and soul to me. And I utterly trust you and make myself vulnerable to you. You utterly trust me, and we make ourselves. And now we'll have this one flesh, glorious new kind of relationship, which is utterly about trust, mutual blessing, and love. This is the Bible's vision. So the quintessential vision of covenant, the present is marriage. So even in, in Shakespeare understood it. Even the director of that movie, Henry V, he understood it. So that they even put, these two nations, becoming one, they signified it with a marriage. So covenant is marriage. Marriage is covenantal. Marriage is like the quintessential picture of covenant. Now, I'm going to say one more thing as I close this out. Why is this important? And what does it have to do with God? I've been talking about nations. I've been talking about man and woman. I'm talking about marriage, because the way God offers himself to us is not simply that he'll be up there, he'll be creator, he'll be judge. And, since he's creator and we are reasonable creatures, as the Westminster Confession of Faith, and we owe him obedience. And since we failed in obedience, God will judge us, send us to heaven or hell, those kinds of things. No, what the relationship God offers us is a covenantal relationship. So God, he's the more powerful part. There's no greater suzerain than God can possibly be. And we're certainly vassals. And if God, didn't want to deal with this, if he wanted to just say, you're ugly and I want to marry somebody else, well, what could we do? We have no recourse. But if God never married us and he only was our ruler, he only was our creator, he only was our judge, that's the only kind of relationship. We only submit, we only bow down. That's all that we have. Okay. And maybe we obey him, but we don't have to love him. We may not even trust him. You know why we obey him? By fear. That's it. Fear. Because since God holds all the cards and all the power, if we go against him, he might squash us, he might condemn us, he might curse us, he may burn us, he may send us to hell. And so the only reason we follow God is because he has all the power and we fear him, but we don't love him. But God wanted us to trust him, see him, know him, love him. And then he would bless us. And this is important too, that he wanted us to bless him. He doesn't need anything, but he wanted us to willingly give our, blessings, give offerings of love to him, give offerings of that which is pleasing to him, which is like fills him with joy. And thus we bless him, as opposed to fill him with pain and fill him with sorrow and fill him with injustice and wickedness. So that it creates anger in him, and then he wants to judge. Instead, it fills him with joy so that we bless him. So the Bible starts in marriage and the Bible ends in a marriage. And the way the Bible depicts God's relationship to us is something like a marriage, which is to say, covenant. So it goes back to Westminster Confession of Faith, chapter 7, where God voluntarily condescends. He didn't just say, I like having all the power. I like being the master of the universe. I'm the super empire and you're just going to be my subjects. And if you obey me, that's all that matters, because if you obey me out of fear, fine. And if you obey me out of love, okay. But actually, that's not what he wanted. He wanted the love relationship. And he lowered himself, condescended, so that now we would have to have something like a face-to-face relationship. And he would now obligate himself that if he failed to love us, he would incur curse himself. That's crazy. That the Almighty God would obligate himself and incur curse himself if he failed to fulfill the covenant love to us. That's the kind of relationship. And then he loves us so much, wants us to love him back, not because we have to, but because we want to, that we'll be utterly naked before him, and he would make himself naked and transparent to us. We would see each other and we would utterly love each other. This is the kind of relationship that is offered from the Bible. The God of the Bible offers this type of love relationship to us, and it can't happen apart from covenant.